Hey, this is Kindred. This is a track. Sorry, this is a track breakdown or tutorial or what have you of my track Subconscious, which now that this video is out on We Are Friends Volume 9. This is something that wasn't too deep. It's just a house electro complextro banger that started with some sound design and some um, splice vocals and turned into something else. This sound design and this splice vocal. Yeah, and so I guess I will start with this bass. So what this bass is, and this is what I'm going to get into a lot, is just some basic layering. And I guess abuse is the wrong word. I use layering very frequently for sound design and mixing and everything. So I started out with this. Let me just turn off this processing. So I started out with this bass, which was a bass I made for my track Altair. You can hear it like right at the beginning. And I just, I wanted that and some drums. Cool pattern, whatever. But this obviously isn't, big enough to occupy that much space. So instead of over processing the hell out of it, which I kind of do in a way anyway, I get a good base. I get a good foundation to start on. So I add more stuff to it, like this, which is a Serum preset that I modified and took the high end out of, I think. Yeah. I think that was because I was having a hard time with it. Yeah. And then a third one. All together. And, that sounds fine, but it wasn't quite doing it, so I also added this mini brute layer from my mini brute 2, which is over there. Sounds like this. And then all those together. And with that, the mini brute. It just and obviously it's like the loudest thing happening here. But it just brings this sort of harmonic presence that digital stuff doesn't. And it helped fill out that space really well, I thought. But yeah, it's just layering and then some basic, compression and EQ. This is just a high shelf to go into OTT. And then a glue compressor for gain staging, which I highly recommend you look up if you don't know what that is and you're a producer. Someone I know, Admiral Bumblebee, has a blog, and he has an article on gain staging that I found very useful several years ago, and it still holds up. And then I have Saturn. So what I'm doing here with Saturn, excuse me, is first of all, it's a multi-band saturator. So I took everything above the sub and I kind of smoothed it out with this clean tape. One sec. And then smoothing it out, meaning I took the saturator and it's kind of acting like a compressor in a way, or like a dynamic EQ, in that it's making the resonant peaks closer together. So if I turn this one off, first of all, it sounds like this, and then I turn it on, just kind of smooths it out. Why is that there? And then there's this low end thing. which all that's doing is I'm going to cut out the sub later in this chain, and I know I am. So I'm getting some of that subharmonics, some of those subharmonics up into this area so it can be a little bit more full and a little bit more heavy. So yeah, like without it, or I guess without it, and then with it, just a bit, and just add some more. And this is the other thing. This is kind of like processing layering. So I did like 18% OTT, which is more than I normally do. I did a little bit of compression. As you can see, that's like barely even moving. I added some more harmonics here. And then over here, what I did is I used Ableton's multiband dynamics, and there's like a million tutorials on this on YouTube. To split frequency bands so I could apply effects to only a certain area. And there are plugins that do this, like Multipass from Kilohertz, which is a really cool plugin. I actually have it. I didn't have it when I made this project. So what it's doing is it's separating the lows from the highs. So how you do that is you set up a macro. God, I forgot the word. You set up a macro here, and you set it over to this crossover point on both of them, so then you can control where the crossover is, and I just happened to want it to be at 940 hertz for some reason. And now, since this is soloed here, and this is soloed here, if I solo this chain, and you can add more chains by just right-clicking and pressing create chain. If I solo this chain, it's now only playing the high end. So now I can add Dimension Expander in Serum Effects to only the high end. And this is the same Dimension Expander that you download standalone. My throat's a little scratchy. And also a little bit of chorus. And those are like my two favorite things to get clean high end out of things. I don't really do Haas effects because it has, you know, phasing issues. Especially when things that aren't in the super high end, and this only cuts off at about 1K, so it's like not about to do that. And then the low end has absolutely nothing. And there you go. And it's a bit muddy, but at least it doesn't have any side information. So there you go. And it kind of just spreads it out, which is what I wanted. I wanted it to fill more space. And then I saturate it again and used iZotope Imager to bring it back to the center and bring it a little bit more focused, so without it, especially in this low end. So if I solo this, so I toned it down a lot because it was like this. You can kind of hear the difference. Same thing for the sub area. Even though I'm going to cut it out anyway, it's good practice. And it was just a little bit too wide in the top end, so I pulled it down the top end too. And then I compressed the top end to try and get some more highs out of it while it's also being controlled. Because I could just boost it, but at this point in the chain, I didn't really want to do that. And then I was dipping this right here, just because there was too much of it. What is happening? Yep. Yeah, so I just decided to compress it instead of EQing it, because I want it to be consistent too. Because also, you can see like some of the resonances that are happening over here. So pushing some of them close together makes it sound less annoying without doing a bunch of dynamic EQ stuff. And then I also wanted to fill out space, especially above 700 hertz, apparently. And this is Valhalla Vintage Verb. This is one of my favorite reverbs, not because it's, you know, the best sounding or anything, but it has like a nice color, and it gives it a nice space. and it's super straightforward, and it has a built-in EQ. In Valhalla Room, which is the other one, doesn't. So there you go. And it's just super short. It's an ambience type reverb. Super short decay, small mix. Sounds like this. Not a whole ton. And then the EQ, which is doing a ton of work. Because, like, on its own, you're like, oh, that sounds cool, but then, like, in the mix, even with the sidechain, much better if it's much brighter in this particular case. And I actually struggled with that for a while. I remember playing this out somewhere. And it sounded like a mess because this EQ isn't here. And then some sidechain. I normally sidechain on buses, but I didn't do it on the bass bus for a reason. Because I wanted a more aggressive sidechain for this electro bass than I did for the filler stuff. Especially because this is playing on the downbeat a lot, so it conflicts with the kick, so it needs to be more aggressive. Also, I sidechain to a click, which sounds like this. It's literally like 8 samples or something, and it's like turned up 2 decibels, so it's normalized. And that just like with this Ableton compressor makes it a lot easier for me to control the shape of the sidechain, as you can see, like here. It's a lot smoother because it allows it to like naturally come up instead of like conforming to the shape of a kick drum or even like an EQ'd kick drum or something. Just a lot easier for me that way. So that's why I do it that way. And I could use something like LFO Tool or something, but LFO Tool has like latency problems sometimes. And stuff like I'm forgetting the name. There's a few others. There's like there's a gate plugin that can do it too that Mr. Bill uses, stuff like that. I don't do it because I've been doing it this way, so I don't know. Why would I change? But also, like I said before, I cut out the sub here, and there's a reason for that. So if I get this and it sounds okay, but first of all, if I did it this way, then I wouldn't be able to use some of this EQing the way that I did. And second of all, I couldn't have easier control over the sub level in this track, which is very important in electronic music, mixing your sub to the right level. And I actually mixed the sub too loud in this track, but that's okay. So I have a separate sub for a lot of things that happen, notably the main stuff, like this bass. And then I have this sub following it. And I can separately sidechain the sub bass so that it's not conflicting with the sub on the kick drum, and also I can have it not be too long of a sidechain for like this sound. And this patch is super simple. I took the basic shapes thing inside of Serum and I drew in 3 harmonics. There you go. Now I just messed around with the harmonics until it sounded decent. This is like a saved preset now. And then I saturated it a little bit more with the Moog emulation filters in Serum, just because they sound nice. I abuse the hell out of them for sound design stuff. And then I'm doing this, which is based on the Fletcher-Munson curve. So this is something the Whittler taught me. The Fletcher-Munson curve is basically the curve in which your ears hear sounds, because your ears aren't flat frequency response. And we do have bias, which is why we mix low end higher, louder than we mix high end, like on a pure decibel level, because we hear high end a lot easier. And so it would sound flat to us if we made it quieter than the low end. And in that same vein, if I just have all the subnotes play, and there's like a dramatic difference because down here, like your hearing starts to get worse and worse. Um, you stop hearing notes at like 25 hertz basically. Um, so like if I keep it all the same, and I go here, and I turn off the sidechain. So unless you have like a super boost on your headphones or your monitors, like these headphones do, which I did not mix this track on. I mixed them on my monitors. Then that will sound uneven to you, and the lower note will sound quieter. Even more so now that I have this on. And now that sounds like it has less energy than the high notes, but it doesn't. It's the same. So what you do is you take your highest note, which in this case was B flat, and your lowest note, which in this case was C sharp, and you turn the lowest note up and you turn the highest note down in an EQ, and you have like sort of a natural curve right here, so that as the note gets lower to your lowest note, it's at its loudest point, and then at its highest note, it's at its quietest point. And it keeps the harmonics intact. So there you go. That's why I do that. And then there's like, you know, going back to the groove or whatever. With this. That sounds cool. It needs more stuff. It needs more space. And I could keep it super simple, but I didn't want to. So I added this. And this, ironically, was a complete accident. So what I did here is I did the kind of stereotypical bass house bass thing. Sounds like this. Where you FM a sine wave to another sine wave, and you took the sine wave that's FMing and put it up a couple octaves or whatever. And I had a filter sweep here too, but normally when you put an amp sim on it, and even like especially so like Ableton's amp sim, it makes that sort of like a bass house bass sound. So I put it on there, and then it did this, which is totally not what I expected at all, but it sounded kind of cool, so I went with it, and that is a good lesson. You're not always going to get exactly what you want, but sometimes it's better than exactly what you wanted. So there you go. So I ran with it, and I compressed the hell out of it, and then I put an erosion on it, because there's that kind of like high-end fuzziness happening, so I wanted to I'm at a loss for words. I wanted to make it more present. I wanted to make the high-end fuzziness more present, so I added an erosion with the noise on. Sounds like that. A little bit subtle, but like I said, I like to layer my processing. And then I did a really aggressive OTT, which is the exact opposite of what I just said. Just because it did the OTT thing, which, you know, is like smushing it and making it bright. And then I threw it into a limiter because it smushed it even more, and I wanted it to be smushy. And then I wanted some wideness out of it, so I added this chorus. And then I wanted more wideness, and I wanted to fill in this space right here, because there's only a kick happening. And if I turn off the reverb, then it doesn't fill out the space, but if I keep it on, then it sort of like fills out that empty space, while also keeping it sort of empty. And then EQ, which is just cutting out, you know, the sides on the low end, because you don't really want stereo low end. And then that was cool, and I also added like these super saw fills, which is just like an OTT'd super saw and some reverb. So there you go. So it sounds like this now. But that wasn't enough, and I could add like some lead or something, but instead I just had to do vocal chops. I should turn those on. And even these are a bit varied. So what I did here, and this is a tip from a friend, his artist name is Makai. um, is I ran it through some weird plugins and like scrolled through the presets and just had it constantly recording, and then found some cool stuff and like threw them in these vocal chops. So those sound like this. You know, like Glitch Machines and Fat Filter Saturn and Grain Delay even in Ableton, because Ableton has awesome stock plugins. And then you can hear like, especially like right here. Like there's the first one. I just threw in some variation every once in a while, like this one. Not that one, this one. Just added some extra stuff. And there you go. Yep, and then that is this drop. And then I just, you know, it plays, and then it does the thing where it goes up and then back down again. Just, you know, the thing to do. And then instead of keeping it really boring and just doing that 4 times, you add more stuff as it goes along. So I added the square pluck. And also these hi-hats. Quick note about hi-hats. I think it's on this one I did it. Yep. So if you listen to this hi-hat, if I turn this off, a little bit bright. And this tends to be the case for most sample pack hi-hats. So what I like to do is shelf down the high end and then bring up a little bit below that at like 3K. Sometimes at like 5K. So now, if I turn it off, it's kind of bright and thin and tinny. And if I turn that on, it's present, but it's full. And also I cut out the low end, but I did it over here. Just quick tip. But yeah, I added some hi-hats. And I took 2 and I hard panned them, and then every other one, it plays 2 instead of 1, like this. So just a fun little stereo thing to, you know, like ear candy. You know, stuff to keep you interested while you're making EDM, like deadmau5 said in his masterclass. And added like, you know, the triple ride cymbal thing for fills. And then you hit the middle, and you could just have it keep going, but I added a fill. And that's just like something I made on my Mini Brute. And then something I made. Just looks like this. Filter envelope. Yep. Cool thing about this, this is being completely carried by one plugin, basically. So this is what it sounds like without that plugin. Sounds cool. And then I added this Tau Chorus. Tau Chorus is absolutely amazing if you have analog equipment. I don't know what it is about this chorus. I think it's like a Juno emulation or a Jupiter emulation. But it sounds super nice on analog gear. It doesn't sound great on digital gear for some reason, but it sounds really great on anything analog. Digital gear, that's not a thing. And yeah, and I did the thing again because it doesn't have any EQ, and I made it so it only does it on the high end. So then the low end is intact. But it like completely makes the sound. So yeah. And then, you know, like added more stuff, added this thing that rises, added an arpeggiator, ARP, whatever. And then had this keep going, and added some ride cymbals. Did the panning thing again. And then I had the same thing in the second drop, but it was boring, and so I changed it because it was boring. And you can, you know, there's a lot of tracks where the first drop is the same as the second drop, and they like vary one thing, and it sounds awesome, and there you go. This was not the case, so I completely changed it, and I did the Kindred thing. So I added some supersaws. And the thing about this section is it kind of makes the track, and that's why I called the track Subconscious. Well, first of all, because the lyrics say all in my head, and subconscious, and yeah. But also it was like I was thinking too hard about this second drop, and I was like, what if I just, do the thing I normally do, which is that. And then I add the first part back, and it's like, wow, this complements each other, and I didn't think it would. And I was thinking too hard about it. And once I stopped thinking so hard about it, then it came to me. And I shouldn't have been putting that much pressure on myself. And I think a lot of people do that. And same thing with this fill right before. So like right before this first drop, there's a double snare thingy. Like the stereotypical, like literally this is from a Vengeance pack. And then I added 2 snares on it. Super stereotypical, and it like wasn't doing it for me. As you can see, I deactivated it, so I added this laser, and then I added this to fill out the rest of the space, which is the entire song sampled back on top of itself. And I just oscillated this one section where there's a kick playing, because I could have done it with like Serum or something, with one of those dubstep wavetables or whatever, but it didn't sound glitchy enough. Like I wanted it to sound like it was glitching into the saws, like it was having a hard time playing, and then suddenly, oh wow, it works now. So it sounds like this. Kind of cool. And the thing about this bass pattern too is it's different from the first drop, right? So then I changed it to suit what I wanted to do. So I had it follow this chord progression. And the thing about this breakdown too is it's, all layering. Like I have a drone, and then I have this chord pluck thing. And then eventually I add a new melody. Then I add the top, like an octave up. And I add this bass thing, which I got from listening to that East Coast album that came out last year. And it's totally okay to do that, steal shit from other people, because that's what art is. And I added strings, and then I added this snare roll thing. That's not a snare roll. I added these ride cymbals, and then I added this snare roll thing, and it like goes up. It's just layering. It's just adding more stuff until it makes it more interesting over time. Yeah, but that's the reason that this is playing this pattern. So the saws play the first part of this pattern, and the bass plays the second part. And even then, I was like, this is not that interesting. So I added more stuff into it. So I took this sound again, throw back to the first drop. That's like the whole section. Throw back to the first drop, and then I added this mini brute thing that I used in an earlier version of this track and just ended up not using for some reason. So I put it here, and it worked. So that sounds like this. And about the saws, I get asked a lot about these saws. So this is kind of the same thing as the bass. I start with one layer, which is this, and then you add more stuff. You add more layers that fills out the space appropriately. So this is kind of, I would describe it as bright and noisy, but it's a good starting place. So I added basically the same thing, but I didn't put OTT on it, and it made it more smooth. And I put it in an octave up, apparently. So then together, but then it needed more body. So I added some super squares, which is just the same thing with some square waves. And then I actually wanted some more noise, because I ended up wanting to rely on this bass layer so that I had more noise. which seems kind of counterintuitive until you add this to it, which is just 2 Serum presets that I changed to fit my use. And then I put them together and compress them. And then all together. This is another example of where I used a dedicated sub. Even though it's like mostly not there because it's being sidechained so hard. Yeah. I guess the last thing, the last thing I didn't go over was these drums. So these drums are not that complicated, but I don't really do it this way anymore. So again, I layer my kicks and I layer my snares. So the kick is this layer and this layer. And this is a Black Octopus Leviathan kick. Octopus. Couldn't say that word. And this is a deadmau5 kick that is high passed. And you'll notice this one's a little bit offset, and that's because they were phasing. So Bentley Dean, who is another artist on this label, so kindly offered to phase correct them. And then he did, and now they sound good. So like without this really nice transient on it, which sounds like this, that's the only reason I wanted it. Because this could sound fine by itself in some contexts, but I wanted a sharper transient. So then without it, and then with it, a little bit brighter, a little bit sharper. And I'm using this glue compressor to transient shape. And you can do this with a transient shaper, which is what I do now. I use Neutron 2, and that is because Neutron 2 has a multiband transient shaper, which is awesome. If I turn this off, same thing. I turn this up. It's a little bit much because it's running into the saturator right now. But I could say, like, I just want the high end to do that. So then I like turn this off, and I do this. And then the low end is the exact same, but the high end is doing transient things, which is cool. But I didn't have that when I was doing the project. So a way to do it with a compressor is to turn the attack very high. So this is how you do it. I'm just going to remember these settings real quick. So if I just turn all of these back to their default. So here's the kick. And then you turn it down. And there, now there's like a really sharp transient. And then I turn it back up a little bit. And then I turn out the makeup gain just for gain staging purposes again. There we go. We can see over here that it is gain staged properly. But now, that is too punchy. So we're going to do something called parallel compression, which you can look up if you want to know what that means. But basically, it is running two signals parallel to each other, and one of them is compressed and one of them is not. So this is the compressed signal, and then if I turn dry wet all the way to 0, this is the uncompressed signal. And then I turn it at like, I guess 65%. And there you go. And now it's punchy. I do the same thing for snares. And I added another transient shaper onto this one for whatever reason. Yeah, just 3 snares. Leviathan snare, Virtual Riot snare, and Leviathan clap. And the thing about snares too that I like to do is I have them shifted. So if I turn this on, that sounds fine. You can do that. But I like to do this. It's kind of messy. It has a kind of cool sound to it. So I shift the snares back a little bit, and you can see, like, yeah, they're not all the same either. And the clap is there to make it extra messy. So if I turn the clap off, and then the clap, because the clap already has like 4 transients or something. So it makes it super messy. And then this is a really cool trick, especially if you make like dubstep um, or mid tempo or whatever genres like that. If you take Ableton Saturator, again, Ableton has great plugins. You don't need third-party plugins to do things, um, but sometimes they are better at doing their job. Which is why you get them over time, and then you get good at it. So if you take Ableton Saturator and you put it on medium curve, um, I don't know exactly why this is, but it just like smushes, like it you put it on a drum bus and it just like acts in a way that other things don't, and it kind of makes them bigger but also have harder transients at the exact same time. So without it, and obviously it's gonna make it louder too because it's a saturator. So like this, and then I turn it on, and wow, it's so much bigger now. And that's a decent way to do drum processing. It works. It worked in this track. I would have done it differently. The next time that I do this track again, which I won't, but yeah, that is a way to do that. So yeah, that is Subconscious. I hope you found this informative or helpful in some way. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I also stream on Twitch TV, so twitch.tv/kindred music. So when I'm streaming there, which is like once every time the moon and Mercury aligns or something like that, you can ask me questions there and I'll answer them. Or in Discord. I'm in a bunch of Discords. Yeah, check out this track along with a bunch of others that are really good on We Are Friends Volume 9. I'm sure the link will be in the description. And thank you for watching. Peace.